At 16, with just a fleeting glance, I quietly placed the young man beneath the peach branches at Baima Temple at the tip of my heart. 2 years later, an imperial decree named me imperial consort. The young man panicked, giving me a safety jade pendant to confess his feelings. His eyes rimmed red as he only wished for my remaining life to be peaceful and joyful. But the very day I entered the palace, I was despised by His Majesty and thrown into the cold palace to a miserable end. Before my death, I arranged through someone to see him one last time. He looked at me with disgust. "What kind of thing do you think you are? If I weren't afraid you'd take away Yin Yang's favor after entering the palace. Do you think I would have known you?" Yin Yang was the Empress's boudoir name, so it turned out all of this was for her. I died filled with regret and hatred. When I opened my eyes, I had actually returned to the day he gave me the jade pendant. The timing of my rebirth was unfortunate. I had already been tricked by Yueshi into coming to the back mountain of Yuquan Nunnery. That face I had once glimpsed fleetingly in my youth now filled my heart with utter disgust. Where is there any fleeting celestial visitor? He is just an ordinary mortal. I merely lost focus for a moment, and Pei Jingyan's eyes showed concern. "Mingzhu, are you feeling unwell?" I turned aside to avoid his hand reaching to support me, lowering my eyes to hide the hatred within them. Pei Jingyan had stunningly beautiful looks and a sharp temperament. Even while remaining composed, he was like an unsheathed precious blade, afraid he might notice something amiss. I leaned most of my body against Yueshi, covering half my face with a handkerchief. "Young Lord Pei, you and I are not acquainted. Please observe propriety and do not come closer." Pei Jingyan pressed his lips together, the impatience on his face transforming into a reluctant, unspoken longing. He took out a smooth, milky, white mutton, fat jade pendant from his chest. "Mingzhu, this is a protective jade pendant that Jingyan sought for you from the White Horse Temple. We have no fate in this life. I only wish you peace and happiness for the rest of your days." My gaze fell coldly on his hands. His fingers were slender, with thin calluses on his fingertips worn from diligent practice with swords and blades. But what he held now was not a token wishing for my safety. It was a blade that would ruin my entire life. After I was banished to the cold palace, my aunt came to see me. She slapped me with bitter disappointment. "Mingzhu, since when have the girls of our Song family become so cheap? You were secretly exchanging tokens with Pei Jingyan before entering the palace. Do you not want your life anymore?" I was dazed by the slap, tears streaming down my face in an instant. My aunt yanked the mutton, fat jade pendant from my waist and threw it at my face viciously. Pei Jingyan is a habitual philanderer. He had many similar mutton, fat jade pendants custom, made and would give one to any girl who caught his fancy. Only you dared to wear it so openly. My face stung with burning pain, yet my whole body felt as if plunged into an icy hell, even my bones trembling. I clutched the hem of my aunt's skirt, my head hitting heavily against the green bricks, my desperate pleas mixed with blood and tears echoing through the empty palace chamber. Aunt Mingzhu didn't. Mingzhu did meet young Lord Pei before entering the palace, but Mingzhu never accepted his jade pendant. This white jade clasp was put on me by Yueshi. I didn't know where it came from. My aunt's voice was utterly despondent. "Mingzhu, had I known you were raised to be so naive, I should never have agreed to let you enter the palace. The Song family has been reprimanded by imperial decree. Your father, as the leading figure of the literary world, has lost all face and has already retired to his hometown. The Song family's reputation for strict propriety and scholarly righteousness is completely ruined." I gathered my hatred, slowly letting it seep into a smile as gentle as spring breeze. In my past life, I didn't accept Pei Jingyan's jade pendant, and even left resolutely after he expressed his feelings. Yet that jade pendant still ended up on me the very day I entered the palace, directly leading to my dethronement and causing my upright and principled father to be consumed by grief. In just a few short years, he became bedridden with illness and passed away in sorrow. The Song family, known for passing down etiquette and inheriting scholarly traditions, was thereafter branded with the stigma of failing to discipline their daughter, and thus fell into decline. Under Pei Jingyan's gaze, I extended my fingers and gently picked up the jade clasp. "How thoughtful of you, young Lord P." Perhaps he didn't expect me to be so compliant, that the pearl of the Song family, a paragon of feminine virtue, would so easily yield to him. Mockery surfaced in his eyes, his countenance beneath the gold, framed jade fan utterly arrogant. I suddenly smiled and turned to leave. "Pei Jingyan, you are willing to devote everything for Xiying, to keep the emperor and empress harmonious, and the harem peaceful. I simply won't let you have your way." 3 months later, when lotus fragrance filled the air, I entered the palace gates with great fanfare, my dowry maid replaced by Chuangji. In Fungi Palace, I removed the elaborate palace attire and gazed intently at the exquisitely beautiful face in the mirror. On looks alone, I was no less than the empress who outshone all beauties. And moreover, the empress dowager was my own aunt. Even if the emperor and empress were deeply in love, I still had the power to fight. No wonder she was afraid. In my previous life, on the day I entered the palace, I first went to pay respects to the emperor and empress. As the emperor gazed at me with amazement in his eyes, the empress nonchalantly pointed at the jade pendant at my waist. "It does look somewhat familiar." Yuechi lowered her head behind me. "This jade pendant is Mrs. treasured possession. She would never part with it easily." The emperor's face darkened until it could drip water, when he ordered people to drag me away. Whether from guilt or reluctance to watch, the magnanimous and gentle empress closed her eyes. The corners of my lips slowly curved into a smile, my eyes lifting slightly, adding a hint of elusive allure to my ethereally beautiful appearance. "Your Majesty the Empress, we're about to meet again. I just don't know if you'll like this meeting gift." That day, Mother captured Yueji and gave the signed confession to Father. Father cursed the Pei family for being underhanded and made a big show of throwing Yueji at the gates of the genuine Marquis Manor. A single phrase: "To have a son like Pei Jingyan is to shame one's ancestors," pushed the genuine Marquis Manor into the eye of the storm. In the serene and grand palace chambers, the candles burned bright. I gestured for Guangji to help me remove the hairpins and ornaments from my head. "Let's rest." "But Your Highness, His Majesty hasn't come yet." "Tonight His Majesty will stay with Her Majesty the Empress. He won't be coming." The Emperor, the Empress, and Pei Jingyan had grown up together since childhood, and their bond ran deep. The Emperor and Empress were deeply devoted to each other, vowing to grow old together. But after they married, Pei Jingyan suddenly changed. The proud and unrestrained young man began to indulge himself recklessly, until philandering became his nature. So, amid those rumors, the claim that young Lord Pei of the genuine Marquis Manor was obsessively entangled with a maidservant was easily believed. The genuine Marquis, who knew the truth, couldn't bear the charge of framing an imperial consort, so he could only swallow this loss in silence. He took Yueshi as a concubine for Pei Jingyan and beat him so severely with family discipline that he couldn't get out of bed for 3 months. The Pei Jingyan of now was no longer that dashing gentleman who had once been the most stunning in the capital. His reputation was ruined, and no respectable young lady from a proper family would marry him anymore. It was for Her Majesty, the Empress, that he had fallen to such a state. Therefore, whether to vent his anger or to make me lose face, she would keep His Majesty occupied tonight, and put me in my place. Sure enough, a palace servant came in to announce an edict. The palace servants in Fungi Hall exchanged glances, but I slept soundly through the night, despite Chuangji's worries. When I went to Jiaofeng Palace to pay my respects, the Emperor was also there. He was leaning lazily against the Empress, their posture intimate. I bowed down in obeisance, my etiquette so impeccable that no fault could be found. But the Empress clearly didn't want to give me face. She lowered her eyes without speaking, as if her gaze was glued to the teacup. For the time it takes to drink a cup of tea, whispers from the consorts around me could already be heard, and gazes of either disdain or curiosity fell upon me one after another. But I remained respectful throughout, my expression calm. The Empress couldn't go too far, so she could only tell me to rise. I staggered slightly but quickly steadied myself. I raised my head in the morning light and slowly broke into a smile at the Emperor and Empress. "This humble consort thanks your Majesty, and thanks the Empress." The consorts who saw my face clearly gasped, while the Empress set down her cup without a change in expression. The young Emperor instantly sat up straight, leaning slightly forward, his eyes filled with undisguised amazement. Indeed, the pearl of the Song family. When His Majesty left with me, the Empress's face darkened. After leaving Jiaofeng Palace, I tugged at His Majesty's sleeve and said slyly, "Actually, cousin doesn't need to accompany me to pay respects to the Empress Dowager. Mingzhu won't tattle." The Emperor looked somewhat embarrassed at having his thoughts exposed. He cleared his throat lightly and explained on behalf of the Empress. "Yin was feeling unwell last night, so the imperial consort has been put out." I easily believed his words, slipping my fingers into his wide robe sleeve and gently grasping his hand. He paused briefly, gazing at the distant eaves of Shuwa Palace, and never pulled away. The Emperor stayed at Shuwa Palace, chatting with the Empress Dowager for a while. Seeing that I truly had no intention of tattling, he left with peace of mind. "You are quite composed, after all. Not as foolish as your father said," my aunt remarked. Looking at the faint worry hidden in her eyes, I eventually teared up. In my previous life, I was confined to the cold palace, surviving entirely on my aunt's support. But after my maternal family fell from grace, my aunt was indignant that Pei Jingyan and the Empress had framed me. She wanted to seek justice for me, but eventually grew estranged from the Emperor. In the end, the Empress used the pretext of praying for the late Emperor to send her to Huangwei Temple, where she passed away not long after. My aunt paused. "There is no need to cry. I know you've been wronged. Among the 4 daughters of the Song family, your 3 older sisters are all renowned in the capital for their talents. Only you stand out for your beauty. When the Emperor wanted to select a Song girl for the palace, Shi Yingyang probably thought you would be the easiest to deal with, which is why she chose you. Mingzhu, you are beautiful, with a naive and endearingly innocent nature. In this imperial harem, these can be both weaknesses and strengths. You needn't worry. The Song family doesn't need you to bring glory to our clan. As long as you don't make any mistakes, your aunt can protect you." She patted my hand meaningfully. The Empress has always been proud and self-important. "Mingyue, just being yourself is good enough." For 3 consecutive days, His Majesty stayed at the Empress's Jiaofeng Palace. The entire palace was watching me become a laughingstock, also waiting to see if the Empress Dowager would reprimand the Empress on my behalf. But they were disappointed. Neither the Empress Dowager nor I acted as if anything had happened. Every day I followed palace rules, remaining calm and composed when paying respects to the Empress, and genuinely enjoying myself when accompanying the Empress Dowager in chanting sutras. It was actually His Majesty who went to the Empress Dowager somewhat sheepishly to explain, "Yin has caught a cold these past few days. It is not that I intentionally neglected the imperial consort." The Empress Dowager didn't mind. Harmony between Emperor and Empress is a blessing for the nation. The Empress has always been sensible. Since she is unwell, your Majesty should indeed keep her company well, so as not to worry Duke Dingguo. Mingzhu is young and simple. Natured, she won't take these things to heart. Shortly after His Majesty left Shuwa Palace, he came to my Fengyi Hall. He brought only a young eunuch, didn't have the palace servants announce him, and quietly hid under the silk tree not far from me. At that time, with my long hair loose, wearing a plain yellow gauze blouse, I was excitedly catching fat koi from the pond in the back courtyard with Guangji. I finally managed to net one, But before I could even be happy, the fat koi leaped out with the momentum of a carp leaping over the dragon gate, fiercely splashing water all over me and soaking my thin blouse through. I looked at Kwangji, wanting to cry but having no tears. Kwangji's gaze passed over my shoulder, and she bowed to the approaching emperor. "This servant greets your majesty." The emperor didn't look at her, and grabbed hold of flustered me. His burning gaze was like a deep whirlpool. "Noble consort, it is I who came too late. Once there is a first time, there will be countless more." The emperor had tasted the marrow and craved its flavor. In just half a year, I became unrivaled in the harem. I heard that the empress had quarreled with him several times. The emperor had humbled himself to coax her a few times, but the empress still showed no sign of calming down. The most serious time, after a huge fight between the emperor and empress, the emperor stormed out of Jiaofeng Palace in a rage, while the empress smashed precious porcelain all over the floor. When he came to Fengyi Palace, his face was already full of exhaustion. I lit a calming incense, then coaxed him with soft words to drink a bowl of sweet soup, massaged his shoulders and neck, and didn't speak to disturb him. The emperor furrowed his brow, and after a long while, asked me, "How did the empress become like this? She has always been gracious and proper, but lately she has been so ill-tempered." I knew he wasn't looking for an answer from me, so I just softly nestled against him. Sure enough, he let out a sigh. "Mingju, your Fengyi Palace is still the most comfortable place." The summer night was long and scorching, and I became a lotus swaying in the storm, growing ever more alluring on the turbulent waters. When His Majesty left, his steps were hurried, his refined and gentle face tinged with a hint of guilt. I poked my head out from behind him. "Cousin, you looked especially dashing today." His Majesty stumbled, finally turned back, and smiled helplessly. "Mingju, you—" After he left, I stepped barefoot onto the floor and snuffed out the incense expressionlessly. During the season when cold plum blossoms rivaled the snow, the Empress carried a food box to His Majesty's study. They stayed intimate for an entire afternoon, and when they came out, they were chatting and laughing. That night, His Majesty stayed at Jiaofeng Palace. The silver fox fur coat that should have been sent to my palace was suddenly draped over the Empress's shoulders. When I went to pay respects at Jiaofeng Palace, the Empress wrapped herself in the fur coat and made me kneel for a long time. She had changed a lot from when I first met her. She was still a bright and magnificent peony, yet now covered with gray dust. Even the light in her eyes had dimmed considerably. She and His Majesty were childhood sweethearts, growing up supporting each other along the way. Their feelings couldn't be called anything but deep, and the promises and sincerity of their youth were truly heartfelt. But time passes swiftly, and pure feelings became tainted with interests and rivalry, inevitably giving rise to scheming. It had been 6 years since the Emperor and Empress's grand wedding, yet no heir had been born in the harem. Even with His Majesty's consolation, the Empress was still thrown into disarray by my abundant favor. After the Emperor and Empress reconciled, she began trying various secret remedies for conceiving. I once subtly asked her while playing chess with my aunt, "Is it unwillingness or inability?" My aunt's single move captured half of my pieces. Unlike my dejection at losing, her eyes remained calm. The deep affection is real, and so are the interests. Love makes people blind, but hatred born from love will make one lose all composure, even stake everything on a single gamble. What gives you an advantage over the Empress is that you don't love the Emperor. My aunt's sharp gaze swept over my fingers. "Mingzu, wouldn't you say so?" I suddenly released the chess piece I had been gripping tightly, my heart slowly sinking. Yes, the disputes between the Emperor and Empress gradually increased again. Her Majesty. The Empress's temper grew worse and worse. Besides quarreling with His Majesty, her anger spilled onto innocent bystanders. Many favored consorts would be punished by her for trumped-up offenses, copying scripta for minor ones, kneeling as punishment for serious ones. The entire harem was filled with complaints. As for my Fengyi palace, the emperor hadn't visited for a long time. Pyongji would often call out to me when I stood lost in thought by the window. "Your Highness, don't wait anymore. The Empress forbade His Majesty from coming to see you." They quarreled about it for a long time, and His Majesty agreed. I waited day after day, and Cheongji kept saying the same thing day after day. Finally, on the day when the lotus fragrance drifted through the air, she stopped saying it. She bowed deeply to the emperor in the sunset and quickly withdrew. And with tears welling up in my eyes, I rushed forward to him. The young emperor, weary yet gentle, softly patted my back. I broke into a smile through my tears and led him by the hand into the inner chamber. I didn't ask him why he hadn't come for so long, nor did I complain to him about anything. I just clung to him softly and sweetly, lit a stick of calming incense as usual, brought out the sweet soup that had been kept warm all along, and gently loosened his long hair, massaging it stroke by stroke. His Majesty was in a daze for a long while, then took my hand and looked at me carefully, his eyes filled with emotion. He sighed contentedly and pulled me into his embrace. Mingzhu. The emperor spent the night at Fengyi Palace for the first time. After I saw His Majesty off, the empress came rushing over aggressively, sword in hand. "Where is Zhao Yu? Tell him to come out." The sword's gleam was cold as autumn water, pointing at my delicate neck. Palace servants knelt all over the floor, and Shuangji was kowtowing frantically. I replied in a soft and gentle voice. "Replying to your Majesty, the Empress, His Majesty has gone to attend court." The Empress's expression changed slightly, a mocking look appearing on her face. "He lied to me again. He said he wouldn't come to Fengyi Palace anymore." Her expression grew colder and colder, her delicate eyebrows twisted into murderous blades. With a sweep of her arm, the small couch I usually rested on was scattered into pieces. "He said he only loved me. Yet the harem is full of consorts. He said he wouldn't favor anyone else. Yet he got into your bed as soon as you entered the palace. Later it got even worse. He slept his way through the entire harem. Zhao Yu, oh Zhao Yu, which of your words were ever true?" I was so scared I shrank to the side, tears welling in my eyes, about to fall. Yet not falling. The Empress couldn't stand the sight of me, and pointed the sword at me again. "Song Mingzhu, I thought you were a simple one, but I underestimated you. Yun, Di was dragged by you into an entanglement with a lowly servant girl, and Zhao Yu was also bewitched by you, being lured to Fengyi Palace by you every few days." Her sword slowly moved to my face. "I should destroy this seductive fox face of yours." Yin-yang, hurried footsteps of palace servants came from outside the hall. His Majesty was shouting outside the door. The Empress and I turned our heads at the same time, seeing the bright yellow hem of a robe quickly sweeping across the stone path, about to cross the threshold of the hall. "Cousin!" I gathered up my skirt and was about to run outside. The Empress's expression changed. The sword pointing at my face was subconsciously lowered, and as a result, it quickly slashed a wound on my arm. Blood instantly gushed out. I cried out in alarm, and my legs went weak. The Empress's expression slightly froze. She was just about to reach out and help me up, but was pushed aside by His Majesty, who rushed over. He anxiously held me, carefully examining my wound, calling for the imperial physician to come and treat me. Finally, he looked at her with an extremely disappointed gaze. "Zhiyingyang, look at yourself. Do you still have any semblance of an empress?" The Empress's eyes were rimmed with red. She incredulously rubbed her arm that had been reddened by His Majesty's push. "Zhao Yu, you pushed me. You actually pushed me for her." The Emperor refused to meet her eyes. His voice cold. "Escort the Empress back to her palace." The Empress's tears fell non-stop. She laughed while wiping her tears. Fine. Zhao Yu, I'll leave. After saying that, she threw the sword aside and ran away crying. The sword fell and pierced His Majesty's clothes. The palace servants scrambled to clean up. His Majesty's fingers were clenched white. His gaze followed the Empress's figure the whole time. Full of worry, I grabbed his sleeve, cold sweat trickling down my pale cheeks. "Cousin, don't worry. I won't tell Aunt about today's events, and I'll make sure the palace servants keep their mouths shut." Even though His Majesty and I had already warned the palace servants, there are no secrets in the imperial palace. Aunt eventually found out about the Empress causing a scene at Fengyi Palace with a sword and wounding me. The palace consorts, who were punished without reason, also took the opportunity to go crying to Shuo Palace. The Empress Dowager got angry at His Majesty for the first time because of the Empress. "Emperor, this one knows you have deep feelings and loyalty toward the Empress, and you've always done everything you can to love and protect her. You've even neglected the palace consorts and shielded her from the harsh criticism of being childless, just so she wouldn't be hurt. But Emperor, it has been 6 years. You are 24 this year, yet you have not a single child. You should think about the imperial family and yourself for once. Although we aren't mother and son by blood, you've been raised by my side since you were 6. We've supported each other through storms to get where we are today, and you know how hard it has been. Just because you still have no heir, so many people are getting restless underneath, harboring thoughts they shouldn't have. After all these years, you've more than done right by her, Shi Yingyang, and by him, the Duke of Dingguo. If they still hold any resentment, then they're the ones wronging the Emperor's sincere devotion to protecting them. Emperor, it is fortunate that the one the Empress stabbed was Ming's. If it had been any other consort, how would you explain it to their fathers and brothers?" His Majesty remained silent for a long time, then finally issued an edict to remove the contraceptive soup from all the palaces. While I was in a listless slumber, he quietly came to Fengyi Palace once again. He summoned the palace servants to ask about the situation that day, focusing on what the Empress had said to me, what expressions I had used, and how I had responded. 15. My responses were indeed nothing out of the ordinary, and His Majesty breathed a sigh of relief. Another palace maid added, "Before the Empress stabbed the imperial consort, she accused the imperial consort of harming her brother Yun." His Majesty's expression turned cold. "Brother Yun? Paging Yun? He just won't stay gone." He summoned Chuangjia. "Did Ming's know Paging Yun?" Chuangjia thought for a moment. "You mean the young Lord Pei from the Genuine Marquis Manor who took a maidservant from the Song family as a concubine?" After His Majesty understood the whole story, his expression betrayed neither joy nor anger, and he left without a word. Chuangji seemed distracted while tucking in my blanket, so I gave her hand a squeeze. This matter remained a hidden threat after all. Even though father had handled it properly, there were still busybodies making groundless accusations under the instigation of those with ulterior motives. They said, how could someone as proud and brilliantly talented as Pei Jingyun possibly take interest in a maidservant who was merely passable looking? The one secretly involved with him must be someone else. When I heard this, I was shelling lotus seeds in the hall, picking out the bitter cores, and the lotus seeds tasted wonderfully fragrant when bitten into. The rest would be simmered into sweet soup, perfect for cooling His Majesty's agitation. Because of the contraceptive soup incident, he had been fighting bitterly with the Empress again lately. Xingyang was truly an extraordinary woman. She had barely lost some favor, and Pei Jingyun couldn't wait to jump out and clear obstacles for her, not even caring about his own future. But this time, things probably wouldn't go as he wished. As soon as the rumor surfaced, father dragged the Marquis of Jianyuan to court. In court, before all the civil and military officials, he furiously rebuked the Marquis of Jianyuan for failing to discipline his son, causing his son to behave improperly. Father eloquently listed dozens of charges to denounce the Marquis of Jianyuan and his son. In the end, disdaining to serve in the same court as the Marquis of Jianyuan, he resigned in anger. This left the uninvolved officials greatly alarmed, and the Marquis of Genuine, who had been nervously treading carefully, completely lost his composure. Father flicked his sleeves and glanced sideways at the Marquis of Genuine. "I heard that young Lord P has a hunting beauties journal in his hands, detailing when, where, and to which young lady he gave a white jade clasp to show off." The officials who had been silent just moments ago froze, then bowed down one after another, demanding severe punishment for young Lord Pei and the Marquis of Genuine's household. Everything was already settled. Father strode away triumphantly under the ashen face of the Marquis of Genuine. His aspiration was to teach and nurture people. He had long harbored thoughts of retirement, just waiting to resign and return to Lin City to become the headmaster of Yuelu Academy. The Marquis of Genuine was also a decisive man. Before the emperor could issue a decree to punish the Marquis's household, he petitioned to replace his heir with his second son, Pei Huifeng, born of his second wife. The emperor agreed. When Pei Jingyun was young, he often wallowed in self-pity, resenting his father for remarrying after his mother's death. It was Shi Yingyang who consoled him, cared for him, and treated him like her own younger brother. She had always been the son he chased after. But in his eyes, there was only his own son. To keep his son forever radiant, he could snuff out other lights without hesitation. How despicable. He simply didn't deserve to be held dear in anyone's heart. When news of Pei Jingyan came again, it was already spring of another year. He was dead. He died in the army, died in a pointless fight with a soldier, just because a dirty joke the soldier told in private vaguely mentioned the Empress. He flew into a rage for his beauty and stabbed the soldier. Then he was swarmed and beaten by those who had long resented him. By the time the crowd dispersed, he had remained forever in that spring. Marquis Genuine was filled with regret. He and his first wife had shared a deep love, and Pei Jingyan was originally his most beloved child. In his grief, he went to make a scene at the Duke of Dinggua's mansion. After returning, his spirits declined, and he rarely even stepped out the door. Yet Pei Jingyan's death did not cause any ripples in the capital, because at that time, his son, the Empress, had no time to care about his life or death. Ever since the contraceptive soup was stopped in all the palaces, good news from the harem came one after another. No matter how the Empress tried to obstruct and make a fuss, counting all the consorts high and low, there were actually 8 who were pregnant. After learning this news, the Empress sat alone through the night in Jiaofeng Palace. The next day, her gaze was cold and sunken like never before. She didn't spare a single glance at His Majesty, who had stood with her outside Jiaofeng Palace gates all night. Beneath her elaborate attire and ornaments, her features were even more radiant, and her cold, aloof bearing in every movement was breathtakingly beautiful. Her beauty, blazing like the fierce sun, burned the eyes of the palace consorts and firmly captured His Majesty's gaze, making him rush impatiently to Jiaofeng Palace right after court for over 10 consecutive days. Her Majesty the Empress refused to see him. "My lady, Her Majesty the Empress is likely to regain favor." Chuangzi placed the cut flowers into the vase, a look of worry on her face. I just smiled without a word. Regain favor? Her Majesty the Empress had never fallen out of favor. The young emperor was deeply affectionate and sentimental. His earlier coldness toward the Empress was mostly a helpless compromise for the sake of heirs. Unfortunately, the Empress, trapped in love, couldn't see this. She believed His Majesty had long transferred his affections and forgotten his past vows. She no longer trusted him. I leisurely tossed fish food into the pond, attracting schools of carp that swarmed over, their pale white bellies tumbling as they scrambled for food. Her Majesty the Empress will not only regain favor, she will also become pregnant. Chuangzhe gasped softly in surprise. I glanced back with a faint smile. What is there to fear? The ones who should worry now are those pregnant consorts. While playing chess with my aunt, she gazed at me for a long while. You certainly aren't anxious yet. All the palaces are scrambling to give birth to the eldest prince. Her Majesty the Empress is already carrying an imperial heir, and she is thinking of giving birth to the eldest prince at this time. Doesn't she think her life is too long? Several months ago, when His Majesty once again lingered outside Jiaofeng Palace, Her Majesty the Empress finally opened the palace gates. The usually rigid Empress softened her stance, wiping her tears as she reminisced about the past with His Majesty, and poured out old feelings, crying until His Majesty, too, shed endless tears. Ixi Yingyang was not only Pei Jingyan's son. She was also the cinnabar mole engraved on His Majesty's heart that had never faded. Now she had made a powerful return, overshadowing everyone in the rear palace. Apart from occasionally visiting my Fengyi Palace, His Majesty mostly stayed at Jiaofeng Palace with the Empress. This dowager was worried you were too young to keep your composure, but you are quite the schemer. My chess skills had greatly improved, able to hold out against Aunt for the time of another cup of tea. A smile appeared on her face. Mingzhu looks much more relaxed this year, not like the previous years when you were always tense, looking like you were overthinking everything. It is because Pei Jingyan got her retribution, so Mingzhu is happy. Aunt was silent for a moment. Pei Jingyan doesn't count for much. The one who truly made the move is still doing just fine. Mingzhu, you mustn't be reckless. My jade, colored fingers held the chess piece, unconcerned. Since she can conceive, I am afraid the day she breaks with His Majesty won't be too far off. Why should I be anxious? After saying that, my hand paused. I raised my head and met my aunt's solemn gaze. The whole family says you are foolish. Mingzhu, I think you are actually too clever. When His Majesty came to Fengyi Palace, I was copying books. The copied pages were scattered all over the hall. The moment I saw him, my eyes lit up, and I immediately threw down my brush and paper. Cousin, save me. His Majesty playfully tapped my nose with a smile. How did Mingzhu offend the Empress Dowager to actually be punished with copying books? I naturally couldn't tell him the real reason, so I just complained coquettishly. It is just because Aunt thinks I am too young and not steady enough. She is afraid I might disturb the pregnancies of the consorts in other palaces, so she is keeping me confined here copying books. I wrapped my arms around him, pleading softly. Cousin, could you help me ask Aunt for mercy? Ever since the Empress forbade morning greetings from the other palaces, I only go to Shuwa Palace once a day. The rest of the time I am at Fengyi Palace, so there is really no need for me to copy books. His Majesty just smiled and didn't respond. Me aqua. Blue silk shawl wrapped around his arm, my slender white fingers lightly tapping his chest. In my dewy, adoring eyes, only his figure was reflected. The gloom that had gathered between his brows melted away, his eyes sparkling like a starry sky. Mingzhu, you really are a tantalizing little minx. His Majesty lowered his eyes and asked me, Does Mingzhu want a child? I looked back at him openly. Mingzhu only wants to be with cousin and doesn't want a child. Seeing that I wasn't just brushing him off, His Majesty tightened his grip on my hand. The women of the harem all want a child to secure their position. Even the Empress is no exception. Only Mingzhu is different. It was the first time I called him Your Majesty. Your Majesty is already the husband of many, and will be the imperial father of many in the future. I only hope that in Fengyi Palace, Your Majesty is just Mingzhu's cousin. Ever since Her Majesty the Empress became pregnant, she had been very averse to the Emperor visiting Jiaofeng Palace. Every time the Emperor came out of Jiaofeng Palace, he would be in a bad mood. As Her Majesty, the Empress's belly grew larger and larger. The gloom between his brows accumulated layer upon layer, only easing slightly when he came to Fengyi Palace. The Empress and I were childhood sweethearts. For her sake, I neglected the harem and went 6 years without an heir. Even if she never bears a child in her life, she will still be my Empress, the future Empress Dowager. I even considered adopting a child from another consort for the Empress to raise. Yet, Why does she always refuse to understand my good intentions? Is having one's own biological child really that important? The Empress Dowager and I are not biological mother and son either. Yet, aren't we still just as loving and filial? Thinking of my aunt's fate in my previous life, I couldn't help but sneer. Of course it is different. If they were biological mother and son, how could he have let the Empress send my aunt to Huangzhe Temple and so easily destroyed her maternal family? But I just leaned docilely against his back, without saying a word, and he would always stroke my long hair at the end and say, "Mingju, you are still the best." He said it day after day, again and again. Subtly and imperceptibly, these words would always etch themselves into his mind, making him feel as if they were true. The Empress had a miscarriage. When she was 5 months pregnant, she started bleeding without any warning. It was a male infant that had already taken form. This incident was like a boulder crashing into shallow water, the ripples spreading throughout the entire rear palace, leaving everyone fearing for their own safety. After the Empress became pregnant, all her food, clothing, and daily necessities were handled by her own people. She had forbidden the concubines daily greetings, and rarely even left Jiaofeng Palace. Yet, despite being so careful, the child she had worked so hard to conceive still couldn't be saved. When he received the news, the emperor was in Fengyi Hall. He sat for a long time, his cold and stern face revealing no discernible expression. He methodically instructed the palace servants to handle matters, as if he had anticipated this situation all along. When he left, his shadow stretched long behind him, the dark color bleeding into his imperial robes, making his expression excessively somber. "Mingju, I am afraid I won't be able to come see you for a long time. Take care of yourself, and if you need anything, go to the Empress Dowager." I remained silent behind him. We both knew that the rear palace was about to be thrown into turmoil, and the Empress would surely use this as an opportunity to stir up trouble. Even though the imperial physician said the Empress's miscarriage was caused by insufficient fetal development, the Empress still pointed her finger at the pregnant concubines in the rear palace. Whether it was Consort Di, who was nearly full term, or Zhao Yihan, who had always been well-behaved and kept to herself, both ended up with 2 lives lost under the Empress's harsh interrogation. But she still wasn't satisfied. She was like hellfire returning from the underworld, wishing she could burn everyone who displeased her to ashes. But no one expected Her Majesty the Empress would become so deranged. Consort Xiansong, Beauty Li, Zhongyuan Wang, Karen Lin. The pregnant concubines were summoned to Jiaofeng Palace one after another. Their mournful cries went on day and night, and in the end they were all carried out horizontally. The entire inner palace was shrouded in immense terror. The terrified consort Shuzhou and Beauty Xia were taken under the Empress Dowager's protection and moved into Shuhua Palace. The emperor, who had been silent all along, finally spoke. "Empress, enough. Your constitution was never suited for pregnancy. You cannot blame others for the prince's failure to be born. Stop implicating the innocent." "Innocent, Zhao Yu? They're all innocent, and only I brought this upon myself. Is that it? I truly regret it. Zhao Yu, I truly regret it. Brother Yun once said that as an emperor, you could never favor only one person. Yet I actually believed you. How could I have believed you?" At that moment, the emperor's gaze was utterly cold, his calmness bordering on cruelty. "Zi Yingyang, your brother Yun, he is already dead. He died for you." Her Majesty the Empress collapsed to the ground in despair. The emperor flung his sleeves and left Jiaofeng Palace, then placed the Empress under house arrest. The court officials cried out in the court hall for the Empress to be deposed. The sentimental emperor just stood silently before the gates of Jiaofeng Palace, saying nothing. He is still protecting her. Such deep affection. But everyone in the harem only felt a chill down their spines. The usually gentle consort Zhou shed tears in Shuhua Palace. Then what are we supposed to be? Us naturally, we're just whetstones for their faithful love. The crimes of plotting against the imperial heir and harming palace consorts were simply too grave. Marquise Genuine wept and pleaded at court. Since his son Jingyun had gone to the underworld as deserved punishment, why should the empress be allowed to escape unscathed? He knelt at the palace gates for 3 days without food or water, only seeking justice. The emperor and Duke Dingguo were angered by his recklessness, yet were helpless against the support from court officials. Just then, a short opera suddenly became popular among both commoners and officials. The opera was called Peach Blossom, telling of how a wealthy household's master wanted to take the old madam's niece as a noble concubine because his legal wife had no sons. The master's wife had a childhood sweetheart from the neighboring family, who feared his beloved girl would fall out of favor after the noble concubine entered the household. So he schemed to seduce the noble concubine's personal maid, attempting to frame the noble concubine for adultery using a sachet. The fair-faced, handsome young man sang his heartfelt feelings to his beloved girl in melodious tones, willing to go through fire and water and throw away his life, only asking for a smile from her. Just when I was engrossed in watching the opera, the emperor arrived at Shuowa Palace. Consort Zhou and Beauty, Sha bowed with pale faces, while Aunt stared at the stage with a solemn expression. And I turned my back, my eyes brimming with tears. The young emperor watched the noble consort die miserably on stage, and completely lost his composure. He strode over and embraced me. Mingzhu, don't be afraid. I will believe you. I will never let anyone hurt you, he said. Not even the empress. A single opera told the full tale of a passionate couple's love, hate, and obsession. Those who couldn't see the meaning in it merely watched a story of joy and sorrow. But those who understood it would toss and turn, unable to sit still. The first to bear the brunt was Duke Dingguo. Not long after, he submitted a memorial requesting the empress be deposed. The deposed empress still resided in Zhaofang Palace, her food, clothing, and provisions unchanged. It is just that the emperor rarely went to see her anymore. She was like a withered flower branch, like parched land drained of water, with no trace of vitality left. She wandered the palace all day like a lost soul, and her favorite place to come was Fengyi Hall. Her eyes were like a bottomless deep pool, always gazing at me with such profound, profound depth. Sometimes when I turned around unintentionally, I would always be startled by her. Chuangji was quite frightened by her, and cautiously discussed with me. "My lady, let's ask the emperor for more guards. I always feel the empress will try to harm you." I didn't agree. Just as the sun began to tilt westward, one of the earrings bestowed by the emperor went missing. I hurriedly had Guangzhe send all the palace servants out to search, telling her to focus on looking around the carp pond. I went by myself to the Tingfeng Pavilion, not far from Fengyi Palace, to wait for her. The Tingfeng Pavilion was very small, with sheer curtains draped between vines and flowering branches, making it only possible to vaguely make out the people inside. The wind must have picked up, as the flowering branches were trembling wildly. I lowered my head. "Chuangji, I've been in the palace for 3 years now, constantly showered with favor, yet I've never conceived. I heard the imperial family has a sterilization potion. Just 1 dose causes lifelong infertility. Even if one were lucky enough to conceive, the fetus would miscarry midway." I hesitated. His Majesty is wary of my aunt, and favoring me is merely out of necessity. Do you think he might have mixed contraceptive medicine into the tonics he bestowed upon me? "Chuangzhe, should I seek a renowned physician outside the palace to take a look?" When Chuangzhe returned, I was staring absently outside the pavilion. The swaying, flowering branches through the layers of sheer curtains looked just like beasts choosing their prey to devour. Anxious expression appeared on her face, and she only relaxed when she saw I was unharmed. "This servant just saw the deposed empress hurrying past from this direction, and feared something might have happened to you, my lady. Perhaps you saw wrong. I haven't seen her today." I sighed softly. Chuangji, the wind has picked up. Let's head back. When the emperor came to Fengyi Palace again, a palace servant from Shua Palace came to deliver good news. Consort Shuzhou had given birth to the eldest prince. I held his hand with genuine joy, and His Majesty finally relaxed after observing my expression. Mingju, you truly are the best after all. I merely hinted at it, and his eyes lit up brightly as he congratulated him. His Majesty pulled me into his arms, the deep affection in his eyes overflowing. Mingju, will you be my empress? My heart was sour and bitter, yet tears fell from my eyes. I simply didn't respond. In the violent storm, we had a kind of reckless live for the moment madness. The deep night passed, and he kissed my eyes in the morning light. Mingzu, I love you. My eyelids trembled slightly, but in the end I didn't open my eyes. The next time I saw Shi Yingyang was at dusk. She passed by me calmly, her eyelids half drooped. Song Mingzu, I really hate you. After saying that, she slowly walked forward, never looking back. But behind her, I quickly broke out in a cold sweat, my face pale as I collapsed into Chuangji's arms. The present Shi Yingyang overlapped with her figure from my previous life, instantly stirring up the nightmare I had buried deep in my heart. I had once told father, mother, and elder sister about my dream. Only, when mentioning the cause of death, did I just brush it off lightly with one sentence: I merely died in the cold palace. But that wasn't true. My death wasn't that simple. In my previous life, Shi Yingyang eventually learned the truth about the contraceptive medicine through Pei Jingyan. It was clearly a decision made together by the emperor and aunt, yet she solely hated aunt to death. The emperor didn't want to break with her, so he tacitly approved her decision to send aunt to Huangwei Temple, yet was filled with deep regret after aunt passed away. As compensation, he wanted to release me from the cold palace. But it was this very decision of his that ultimately led to my tragic death. It was also at dusk when Shi Yingyang came to the cold palace with a calm face, bringing several eunuchs. The pearl of the Song family was mired deep in the mud. It really hurt. That was grief and violation beyond words. My cries and screams echoed throughout the entire rear palace, then gradually faded into oblivion just before dawn. And that emperor who kept saying he would make amends to my aunt, that emperor who promised me a peaceful rest of my life, never showed up from start to finish. He let his empress do as she pleased. He was an utter liar. Aunt never knew I hated the emperor. She thought I only hated Pei Jingyan, hated Shi Yingyang. But the one I truly hated to the bone was Zhao Yu. It was he who, with no regard for my aunt's grace in raising and supporting him, caused my aunt's death, my death, and ruined the Song family. Everyone knew I was innocent. Pei Jingyan knew, Shi Yingyang knew. Even Zhao Yu, who seemed furious. He was in on it too, but none of them cared. I was merely the whetstone for testing the steadfast love between the emperor and empress. No one would care about my fate. My consciousness sank into a muddled dream, unable to break free from the suffering of the past. I returned to the moment of my death. I had long lost all sensation, dazedly catching a glimpse of the faint fish, belly white appearing at the horizon, cursing uncontrollably at the corner of Yellow Robe before the cold palace gate. Zhao Yu. I seemed to hear his response, his voice gentle yet urgent in my ear. Cousin is here, Mingju. Don't be afraid, I am here. No, I don't want him here. I don't want him. But no one could hear the voice of my heart. He was still calling out to Chuangji beside me. What exactly did the deposed empress do to Mingzu? Why hasn't Mingzu woken up yet? He shouted at the palace servants again. Why haven't the imperial physicians arrived yet? Go summon them quickly. He is so noisy. I don't like him at all. At some point, I suddenly broke free from the constraints of my body and gently floated up. My soul still bore the same wretched appearance from when I died miserably in my previous life. I floated quietly in Fengyi Palace, watching the imperial physicians helpless before my unconscious body, kneeling all over the floor in varying heights under the emperor's fury. I also saw the affectionate emperor staying sleepless by my side through the night, clumsily yet carefully tending to me, his eyes unable to hide his heartache. Aunt also came, tucking in my blanket for me. "Mingzhu, your father said you had a dream before entering the palace. So, that opera wasn't the Marquis of Genuine's doing, was it? In your dream, Aunt still failed to protect you in the end?" she murmured to herself. "Even I myself couldn't have a peaceful end?" Not long after she left, a young imperial physician finally diagnosed the reason for my coma. Poisoned. His Majesty's expression was unreadable. He just lowered his gaze at the physician. What poison? A rare poison from the southern frontier, startling dream. The imperial physician bowed down. The imperial consort has been poisoned for over a month now. It had been just over a month since the empress was deposed, and the Duke of Dingguo had once guarded the southern frontier. Fury surfaced on His Majesty's face. He sneered and smashed the teacup. "Zhi Yingyang, it is you again!" When he stood up, I involuntarily floated behind him. He stormed off to the Jiaofeng Palace. Xi Yingyang was dressed in the full ceremonial attire of a first-rank empress, sitting upright before the vanity doing her makeup. I saw His Majesty's expression grow somewhat dazed, but only for an instant before he turned cold again. "Xi Yingyang, you poisoned Mingzhu?" Xi Yingyang slowly set down the comb and looked at him through the mirror. "Zhao Yu, how did we end up like this?" "Xi Yingyang, I don't want to discuss this with you today. Just give me the antidote, and I'll let bygones be bygones." She started combing her long hair again. "Zhao Yu, you are truly affectionate yet heartless. Is Song Mingzhu the one in your heart now?" The emperor couldn't help but flare up. "Shi Yingyang, Mingzhu has always been respectful toward you, yet you've harmed her again and again. How can you be so vicious?" Xi Yingyang slammed down the comb with a snap. "Vicious? Zhao Yu, that is not what you used to say. You used to praise me as a phoenix with a fiery spirit who despises evil. Now that you don't love me anymore, I am suddenly vicious. Yin-Yang, if you have a problem, come at me. Mingzhu is innocent." "Innocent, Zhao Yu. Those concubines who died by my hand before, they were innocent too. But why didn't you call me vicious back then?" Xi Yingyang rose to her feet. The 9 Phoenix Pearl, holding Biao on her hairbun, swayed gently as she walked toward the emperor step by step, leaning close to whisper in his ear. "Zhao Yu, I don't touch innocent people, but you who tricked me into drinking contraceptive soup on our wedding day? You can't claim to be innocent, can you?" The emperor's face turned pale with shock. His expression was one of utter disbelief, as if he never expected her to know the truth. Xi Yingyang suddenly drew a dagger from her sleeve, and before he could react, swiftly plunged it into his lower abdomen, her expression crazed. "Zhao Yu, you killed our child." The moment the emperor was stabbed, countless fine silver threads emerged from my limbs and bones, swiftly pulling me down toward Fengyi Palace. My tattered soul was gradually restored to its present, life formed by the silver threads, then sank heavily back into my slumbering body. When news of the emperor's stabbing reached Fengyi Palace, I opened my eyes. While the emperor remained unconscious, the imperial physician diagnosed that he had been poisoned. By then, Shi Yingyang had already been locked away. The Duke of Dingguo's household had their title stripped, and the whole family was banished to a bitterly cold land. I brought wine to see Shi Yingyang one last time. I won't be Zhao Yu's empress, nor will I be the empress dowager. Shi Yingyang, even though you've been deposed, you are still his only empress. Xi Yingyang held her back stiff, downed the wine I poured for her in one gulp, and her eyes reddened. I was always his empress. Song Mingzhu, if it weren't for you, I would have always been his empress. I just smiled at her. No, Once you learned the truth about the contraceptive medicine, you two were destined to torment each other. Sometimes, love alone isn't enough, especially when the two parties' statuses are fundamentally unequal. The two of them were destined to go from a perfect couple to bitter enemies. Zi Yingyang, I once saw you back when I was still in the boudoir. Tears welled up in my eyes as my thoughts drifted back to the distant past. Zi Yingyang glanced at me in confusion, and I continued. That year, you appeared at White Horse Temple dressed in pale men's clothing, looking like an extremely handsome young gentleman. Amid the peach blossom petals dancing in the air before the temple, you caught a girl who had fallen from a peach tree. In that moment, you were just like her light. But later, it was this very light that dragged her into a sunless hell. Zi Yingyang looked at me in a daze, a look of understanding appearing in her eyes. I asked her, how did the Shi Yingyang, who was once so passionate and true, fierce as wind and fire, who wanted to slay enemies at the frontier, how did she become like this? I didn't get her answer. Perhaps even she herself couldn't say why. I put away the wine pot and left, glancing at her. You don't need to look like you are waiting for the poison to take effect. There is no poison in the wine. She raised her head in surprise, unable to help asking me, Song Mingzhu, why? My feet didn't stop. The person Zhao Yu loves most now is you. Why would you do this? She spoke calmly behind me. The dagger I stabbed Zhao Yu with wasn't coated with poison. 30, I went to see my aunt. Before she could speak, I had already bowed down. This time, I told my aunt everything that happened in my past life. Completely, including my death. My aunt was overcome with grief, holding me and unable to speak, only choking out my name, Mingzhu, Mingzhu. Later, she asked me, can you really bear to leave the emperor, no matter what happened in your past life? His feelings for you in this life are genuine. I asked her in return, don't you blame him? My aunt wiped away her tears. Once again, the dignified and solemn Empress Dowager. After Shi Yingyang's brutal killing of the palace consorts, my aunt had learned the hard way about completely relinquishing power, and now the harem under her control was airtight once again. She looked at me meaningfully. It is a good thing that the emperor values feelings. I knew my aunt had her own plans, so I didn't say more. Besides, His Majesty has been drinking my sweet soup for 3 years, and how long he'll live is still unknown. My aunt warned me, still shaken. This time, you are not allowed to poison yourself again. Last time, we almost couldn't save you. It wasn't poison, of course. That year, the history books recorded only one line. In the 10th year of Yuan Zhen, the deposed empress set fire to Fengyi Palace, and the emperor coughed blood without cease. When my elder sister came to pick me up, my tears wouldn't stop flowing. Her expression faltered. If you really can't bear to leave, then just go back. The emperor dragged his sick body and rushed into the fire to save you. Several people could barely hold him back. He called your name as if his heart was being torn apart, every cry soaked in blood. Even I couldn't bear to hear it. I shook my head and said nothing. Me sister said, in the end, he even coughed up blood, so much blood. I quietly followed behind her. After a long while, my sister sighed softly with a relieved tone. Thank goodness, your brain isn't broken. She spat fiercely. Zhao Yu is just sick in the head. Think about it. He used to love Shi Yingyang like crazy, yet still didn't hesitate to give her contraceptive soup. He indulged Shi Yingyang's wrongdoings out of love and guilt, with no regard for anyone else's life or death. And then what? As soon as he fell for you, this gentle blade, he kicked Shi Yingyang until she coughed up blood. When Shi Yingyang collapsed, she shouldn't have called you cruel. The truly cruel one is obviously Zhao Yu. Let's stop talking about those unlucky things. Elder sister silently handed me a handkerchief, rambling on. Eldest sister is now a famous master of landscape painting. Each painting worth a fortune. She painted a whole basket for you. We'll sell them for money when we get back. XKTSK, know what second sister's been up to. She has been scolded to death by Auntie lately. Said instead of studying proper poetry and books, she went off to study commerce. Gotta say, she is making quite a bit. She had someone bring back lots of gems from overseas, for you to pick when you get back. Of course, the most impressive one is me. Your third sister here is now a teacher at Yuelu Academy, properly teaching a dozen or so students. Mingzhu, what about you? Is there anything you want to do? I replied between sobs. I want to write Jizixi plays in the future. I can write really, really well.